Boris Johnson says that the SNP have destroyed Scotland, and the BBC defend Nicola Sturgeon's narrative. Hello everyone and welcome to the first video of the day. So, last night Boris Johnson was on a Zoom video call with other Conservative colleagues, and he mentioned that the devolution experiment has not worked in Scotland. For those of you who don't know, obviously devolution was implemented by Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister. This was done in the name of decentralising powers from Westminster and giving it to Scotland, and obviously Wales as well, other parts. In reality, they didn't decentralise anything. They created another centralised body in the name of the Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government, and nothing's actually been localised. So Boris Johnson said this: the mainstream media and the whole of this establishment treat the word devolution as some sort of given. You know, you can't argue against it. Similar narrative as to how we're all going to die in about 10 years' time because of climate change. You know, if you argue against it, the BBC will get upset because that's the truth. You know, you can't argue against it. We're all going to die in 10 years' time. You know, that's so the BBC have done this article, and their own political correspondents have been going around saying these sort of things.
Good evening. I think this will be seen as something of a political clangor by Boris Johnson.
A political clangor.
The SNP has immediately reacted to the comments, saying it shows that the government here in Westminster is a threat to the powers of the Scottish Parliament. And I think this could be a problem, a potential embarrassment for Scottish Conservatives. Remember, we are 6 months out from a crucial Holyrood election where Scottish independence, Scotland's place in the Union, is set to be a central issue.
Right, so the BBC think that this is a political embarrassing moment for the Tories. So obviously, don't be surprised that throughout the whole day, everyone's been saying that this is embarrassing, up to a point where we had some of the Tory politicians coming out to justify the comments. This is exactly how the mainstream media create and shift the narrative. So obviously no one was thinking that. There are a lot of people who think that devolution is not a good idea. And doesn't mean that you have to get rid of it and centralise everything back to Westminster. No, there are alternatives. A true localising program would actually work, rather than giving the whole thing to the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon. So that's what the BBC are doing now, and they've also written an opinion piece, because that's what they do now these days. Laura Kuenssberg, who's the political editor of the BBC, has written this article today about this, how this was a mistake, this was an error, and it's going to basically cost Boris Johnson. Now, the issue I have with this, for example, she says that it was only on Sunday that the Prime Minister was hoping to use this week as a reset, relaunch, even rebrand of his government after the Crazy Bee movie version of House of Cards that's been playing out in the last few days. Now, that's a fair comment. So far, so good. Obviously, it's an opinion by the BBC, but that's a whole different topic. Then she says, it is one thing, and of course legitimate, for political rivals to criticise each other, but to suggest that the way that Scotland has been run for more than a decade is a disaster is quite another. So she's now defending the SNP and the centralised system in Scotland, saying, well, yeah, you could criticise other parties for their policies, but you can't criticise the SNP government. You can't criticise even the previously Labour politicians in Scotland that they've made a mess in Scotland. So, and then she says, and the worry among Scottish Conservatives is the implication that Mr. Johnson's understanding of the political situation is far from complete. Nonsense. She's like Laura Kuenssberg and the BBC are defending the SNP. They're defending people like Humza Yousaf.
The Lord President, white. The Lord Justice Clerk, white. Every High Court judge, white. The Lord Advocate, white. The Solicitor General, white. The Chief Constable, white.
Every Deputy Chief Constable, white. Every Assistant Chief Constable, white. The head of the Law Society, white. The head of the Faculty of Advocates, white. Every prison governor, white. And not just justice. The Chief Medical Officer, white. The Chief Nursing Officer, white. The Chief Veterinary Officer, white. The Chief Social Work Advisor, white. Almost every trade union in this country headed by people who are white. In the Scottish Government, every Director General is white.
Every chair of every public body is white.
Yeah, everything's white. Brexit's white, breakfast is white, Christmas trees are white. 82% of the Scottish population are white. Maybe that explains it, Hamza. Now, you think that's bad? The Labour Party have come out. Yeah, they still exist. So Labour have now said that this confirms that Boris Johnson doesn't believe in devolution and would put the future of the UK at risk. Devolution is one of the Labour's proudest achievements, and we will always fight for a strong Scotland in the UK. Are you guys absolutely kidding me? It's the most hilarious and the most idiotic thing I've heard from the Labour Party in the last 2-3 hours, I think. And up to a point where the media pressure has been so bad that even some Conservatives and ministers have been coming out to somehow justify Boris's comments. He's the Prime Minister, but you've had people like Robert Jenrick, or Generic, in my opinion, coming out to say that, Boris didn't actually mean that devolution was a disaster. Sure, the Prime Minister has always supported devolution. I mean, what's going on? It's another flip-flopping U-turn situation by the government again. Just stand by your comments. You've had the Scottish Conservatives coming out being defensive. You had some of the MPs, but obviously Downing Street have not denied the comments, which is fair. But to explain the whole situation with devolution and what's happening with the SNP, I have a special guest on today's show. I have Henry Hill, who's the news editor of the Conservative Home. So what do you think, Henry, about obviously Boris's comments about devolution in Scotland and the reaction we've got from obviously the SNP, even the Labour Party defending the SNP's narrative, even the mainstream media, the BBC. So what's going on here?
So the Prime Minister has really let the cat out of the bag. I mean, I have been ploughing the Devo-skeptic furrow, the people who don't believe that devolution was a good idea, for about 10 years. And it's been fairly lonely. Because after Tony Blair brought it in, he won in 1997, he held referendums in Scotland and Wales, and they both voted to have these assemblies. Wales only by about 0.1%, something marginal. It's basically just been completely verboten to criticise devolution, even though it hasn't worked, right? I mean, if you go back to the debates in Parliament in the 90s, the idea was that devolution was going to lead to better government in Scotland and Wales by bringing power closer to the people, which is a principle you can support as a Conservative, and B, it was going to appease the nationalists and therefore, quote unquote, kill nationalism stone dead. Now, neither of those things has happened. Scottish nationalism and even Welsh nationalism, if you accept that the Welsh Labour is a nationalist party these days, is stronger than ever. The United Kingdom appears in many ways to be on the brink of breaking up. That's because we've given the SNP so many opportunities to undermine the United Kingdom. You've given them treasuries, pulpits, new powers, a new parliament, and all of that. But it also, and this is, I think, important, and this is maybe what the Prime Minister was touching on, it hasn't delivered better government either. Under the SNP in Scotland, we've seen a care homes crisis. We've seen the strangling of local government by an ever more centralising nationalist administration in Edinburgh. We've seen schools underperforming. And in Wales, it's even worse. Wales has had several of its health boards, its NHS health boards, in special measures for 5 years. One of the first things the Welsh government did when it established itself in 1998 was to roll back the Conservative education reforms of the 90s and to opt out of Tony Blair's education reforms. What was the result? Welsh education outcomes, school outcomes, fell off a cliff.
No, so the one thing I want to know is, obviously a lot of people think that if you oppose devolution, what you want to do instead is basically centralise more powers when it comes to Westminster. But in reality, there could be other ways to, because what we've done, it's not really localism. We've just created another centralised body in the name of obviously the Scottish government right now with the SNP and their parliament. So it's not really localised anything, has it?
You know, you're absolutely right. I mean, Scotland and Wales both provide quite good examples of this in different ways. In Scotland, there's been a long-running battle between the SNP and COSLA, one of the Scottish local government associations. Basically, what the SNP has been doing has been freezing the ability of Scottish local government to raise revenue through council tax, and then topping up the deficit with money from the Scottish Parliament. But the difference is that council tax, the council gets to choose how to spend it. Money from the Scottish Parliament tells them how to spend it. So there's been a real squeeze on local autonomy and local communities in Scotland. And that's why last month or the month before, we saw that actually Orkney and Shetland, two of the most outlying communities in Scotland, actually are looking at ways of opting out of Hollywood control altogether. They want to opt out of the Scottish Parliament. And in Wales, we've seen a similar thing. Now, Wales's geography, it's quite a tall, thin country with mountains in the middle. So Wales's geography actually doesn't really lend itself particularly well to everything being done as Wales. In Cardiff, their natural hinterland, if you like, is Bristol, parts of the southwest. In North Wales, all of their transport connections are to Liverpool, Chester, those bits of and those bits of England. But nationalism and devolutionary nationalism has seen the politicians in Cardiff Bay fiercely resisting that kind of thing. And the alternative, some powers should come back to Westminster. Let's face it. Some of these powers that we've devolved to Scotland and Wales are actually important to making sure that a country like the United Kingdom runs properly. This is especially the case of powers that we're bringing back from the European Union. But yes, many of those powers could also go down to communities. Why couldn't we see more power invested in Cardiff and outside the Central Belt, in Aberdeen and the Highlands and the borders? Why couldn't we see power taken away from Cardiff Bay and invested in North Wales so North Walians can make their own decisions? There are so many options for what life looks like after the national devolution experiment. And it suits the Devocrats in Cardiff Bay and Hollywood to pretend that it's all about bringing stuff back to Westminster.
Well, thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed that interview. And try not to believe whatever you hear in the BBC or the mainstream media, because it just messes up with your head. And for the members of the channel, thank you again for all the support you guys given me. If you want to become a member, check out the link in the description. And don't forget to get your latest I Believe in Britain merchandise. You could find the link in the description. And as usual, the members of the channel get a special discount. Thanks again for watching. I'm Tousi, and I'll see you guys in the next video.